Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome, everybody, to Nightlight. Thank you for sharing your evening with us. We really appreciate your time, your energy, and the fact that there's somebody out there listening to us makes it even all the more better for us to do these shows. I want to thank first Ken Quiethawk for his amazing intro. If you want to listen to more of that amazing voice, you can find him at nativestorytellers.com. He and his wife have a wonderful website. They are native storytellers, and the way that they weave their magic into stories and their wisdom into stories and their history into stories and their cosmology into stories is profound. Check it out. It's fascinating. Mark has some great guests tonight. We're going to be talking about one of my most favorite topics of all the topics we cover. And we're going to be speaking first with Dennis Stone from American Stonehenge. And then we have some guys who are going to be talking to us about the Newport Tower. So sit back and enjoy yourself because it's going to be an amazing show. Mark, it's all yours.
How are you, Barbara?
Doing well.
Good. Yeah, it was, tonight's show's focus is on historic preservation and reevaluation. And one of my Christmas gifts to our loyal listeners is that there's actually some semblance of continuity between the first and second hour. And like Barbara said, we'll be covering America's Stonehenge in the first hour and Newport Tower and some possibly related out-of-place artifacts from the New England area in the second hour. But you've probably seen Dennis on the inaugural season of Scott Walter's America Unearthed, or heard him on Willie Miranda's show on KCOR on Friday, and Kat Hobson's Fate Mag radio show on Sunday. He's with us tonight. It's 3 shows in 5 days. I'm glad you could fit us into your schedule, Dennis. And America's Stonehenge is located in southeastern New Hampshire, and he has some updates he wants to share with us. So, hi, Dennis. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great, Mark. Hi, Barbara. How are you doing this evening?
Doing well. Doing
Good.
very well, actually.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for having me on again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So, Dennis, you have a forestry project going on now. What's the purpose behind removing some of the trees at America's Stonehenge?
Well, yeah, we've been actually thinking about doing this for many, many years. We've actually had the University of New Hampshire Forest Extension Service people come out to our site, look at the health of the woods going back into the 1990s. And more recently, one of our researchers, the late Dr. David Stewart Smith, about 7 years ago, he told me we might want to look at getting a licensed forester to look at our forest and have a program of thinning the forest, opening up the astronomical alignments, making fire lanes, also fire roads for equipment in case there's a forest fire. But basically the health of the woods, the health of the animal population, and our woods is pretty overgrown, and I've been thinning it, myself, and my dad did some for decades. And, we probably have about 15 or a little bit more than that out of the 106 acres looking pretty nice, but we have the other 90 acres almost that still need a lot of work. And, I retired 3 years ago and it picked up a lot. But David's suggestion going back, I guess about 7 years ago, he had his property done up in New Hampshire, and he said it came out beautifully. It's not the old horror story of people coming in, cutting your forest, making a mess, butchering it, leaving debris. He goes, it looks beautiful when they get done with it, but you have to have the right people. They have to be licensed, And so he put that bug in my ear, and I was still flying at the time at the airlines, and then because I retired 3 years ago, and I again really picked up the cleaning up there, but I realized I was up against, I won't live long enough to do the other 90 acres, I don't think, So we got a hold of like I say, the Forest Extension Service came back again a year ago this summer, and early in the summer, and they walked the forest and said this is a great candidate for forest management. And after we discussed the whole thing for many, many different reasons we should do it, he gave us a list of, licensed foresters in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. We interviewed a couple of people, and we chose one. And he also not only has his own business, but he does work for the state of New Hampshire. So he's very, he's known, and he's very qualified, and the state uses him too. So he's going to do a good job. And he loves he loves the history and the prehistory of the site. And so we worked on that about 18 months ago. We began that, and, we got him going on it. It takes a long time, though. So if somebody's thinking of doing this, you got to plan way ahead. Not quite 2 years, but maybe a year and a half to 2 years to get things going because they have to line up the forestry people that come in with their equipment, too. So he's the in-between guy. He's kind of between us and the people that are actually doing the work now on the property, which started, almost 4 weeks ago. They started bringing in the equipment. Another thing is we have thousands of feet of walls. We have all the stone structures. We have the standing stones. We have these quarried stones that are all over the hilltop. We found the first one in 1982. These are multi-ton big slabs that were quarried off the bedrock and propped up with a field stone, kind of a rounded, stone. Usually they're about 1.5 to 2 feet across, and they're holding the stone in the air. And what we found out in 1983 by Dr. David Stewart Smith, and also the state archaeologist who's still alive right now, he's retired, they said that these stones were actually shaped using a technique called percussion flaking. It's like knapping an arrowhead, but on a multi-ton scale. So this is a strong piece of evidence that, the builders of the site weren't somebody in the colonial or post-colonial period, that it was actually ancient Stone Age technology. And since that time, we found about 33 of these big slabs up to 1,000 feet from the main site. They're still sitting out there. And, we had to tag all of these. So I walked with the licensed forester, and he's a great guy. And, again, he's really interested in all this and protecting it. And we had to yellow tag all the things we have to protect: quarry site, the stone walls, the standing stones that are monoliths, part of the astronomical calendar. Yeah, so we had to go out and do all of that. And it took really a couple months to do that. And then he ended up painting every tree, and there are thousands of trees. He had to spray paint every tree with like a blue,
Right.
I did each one individually. And then he picked out any trees that were mature, any trees that were going to be dying. Also invasive species. So it was, many, many different things he was looking at, and also protecting the wetlands up there. So leaving a few more trees around some of the vernal ponds up there for the animals and stuff like that. If you take too many trees from them, it would actually dry out these ponds, with the sun beating down on them. So it's a 30-page report he wrote about the whole project. And then we also got the United States Department of Agriculture involved with this. And they're kind of a parallel thing going on. And they can provide assistance too. They actually ended up paying for that 30-page plan, which is very nice, And the plan wasn't really required, but we wanted it. And then the USDA said, we can, cover that because you have, one of the few big areas in Salem, New Hampshire left, green spaces, and they really like it, that we're protecting that much land from development, and all of that. So they may actually reintroduce things like the New England cottontail, some animals that are on the endangered list. Once this is complete, we may have some, more animal life. We have a lot of deer, turkey, red-tailed hawks, and we have some eagle in the area. We've seen a few of those. So we have a lot of wildlife up there that we're going to protect too. So it's not only the forest, but the wildlife. And what they're making out of the wood is the good quality wood will become lumber. The lesser quality is firewood. And the other is wood chips for a power company to make electricity. And the other product, which is actually a little bit more valuable than the wood chips, is pulp for making paper. So they're making like 4 different products, and nothing goes to waste. Anything that's left on the ground either stays there, I'm going to make firewood out of it. But when we get done, it will be like a park, and you'll be able to see the walls much better. And we are opening up alignments that we never opened up. We opened up the first one in 1967, the winter solstice sunset, and that's because of a 1965 TV show on CBS called The Mystery of Stonehenge. And that show is based on Gerald Hopkins' book called Stonehenge Decoded. And he was from the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, and I think Boston University. He's from England originally, but he wrote a book how Stonehenge might be a computer. A lot of the members, including my dad, of a group called New England Antiquities Research Association, and also the people that were involved with our site before that, knew about these standing stones out in the walls, but they were all hidden in the forest. You had to actually go out into the forest and find these standing stones. And even going back into the 1930s, Mr. Goodwin, the first researcher, knew these stones were out there. He owned about 20 acres of land, so some of that was not on his property, actually. It was on a neighbor's property. Eventually, my dad ended up buying the entire hill, or about 106 acres, to protect all the walls, all the astronomical alignments, and even the quarry sites that we found later. And so in 67, we said, you know what, this particular stone looks like it's in the southwest. It looks like it could be where the sun is on the shortest day of the year, the winter solstice. And they began clearing it with chainsaws and axes. I remember them doing that. I was a kid at the time. They didn't have it really ready for 67, I think. They had it kind of almost ready, but the weather didn't cooperate. 68, 69, the weather didn't cooperate. In 1970, next year at this time, we'll have a 50th anniversary of ever watching a sunset on one of these monoliths. And I was there with my dad, the manager of our place back then. His first name was Warren, and a next-door neighbor of mine. So 4 of us, we went through the snow. It was probably about a foot of snow, and we made our way up to the top of the hill, probably around 3:30 in the afternoon, and we stood there, and it was a very cold day. And then around 4:15, the sun's coming down, and it set right on top of the stone. So after that, we began opening up the other alignments, but we never opened up the lunar major standstills. So the moon goes through a cycle every 18 and a half years. One particular year will be what we call lunar minor alignments, and they're actually on some of the cross-quarter days. And for the listeners, we have not only the 4 seasons, but we have days in between the seasons called cross-quarter days. We do that at Stonehenge, and there are a number of ancient sites out west in the United States that have the same feature. They're approximately November 1st, which we just had, February 1st, August 1st, and May 1st. And those, let's see now, the November 1st, February 1st and August were the lunar minor alignments. They're right coincidentally, they're right on the same alignment. The lunar major alignments are outside. They go really further north, 5 degrees than the sun does in the summer solstice, rise and set, and the moon will rise and set 6 months later to the south, further than the winter solstice sunrise and sunset. So we've never cleared out those alignments in 52 years, and that's what we're doing right now. We're going to open them up, and that alignment will be in 2025. So we should have them open plenty of time, and hopefully the weather will cooperate, because we're going to actually witness something we've never seen before with those stones. We know they work when they surveyed it and put it in a computer, but we've never actually watched it with our own eyes. So we got something coming up in a little over 5 years that will be kind of cool.
Okay, so the foresters arrived about a month ago, and they're still there. and with all the alignments that you just mentioned, and the lunar major and minor avenues that you want to open up for people to see, how many alignments are there on the property? Because you'd have like the summer solstice, sunset and sunrise, it's all going like different directions. What are we looking like at 20?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mike. Yeah, it's actually quite a few. So there's for the 4 seasons you have, of course, the equinox will be over the same stone, but there'll be summer and winter. But actually, you could consider that, I guess, 4, really 3 points for the rise and 3 points for the set, because the equinox is for fall or spring. Yeah.
The cross quarter days.
That's another 4 for rise, and that's another 4 for set. So I call it about 29, and plus the true north and south alignment. And the site does have the 4 cardinal points. The north-south alignment we have, and the east-west, of course, would be the equinox for spring and fall. But there's 20. Let me see now. There's 26 alignments, and with a cross quarter and the quarter days being the seasons, and then true north and south alignment. And then the moon will go through 4 for rise, for the lunar majors and minors on the moon rise, and the same thing for the moon set. And like I say, the minors actually use the same alignment for February and also for August 1st, which is kind of cool. And it's like a duplicate, thing that it will kill 2 birds with 1 stone, this particular alignment, But the majors, again, we never opened those up. And they actually would be the hardest because they're the longest alignments, the way the hill's shaped and everything. We have to clear out several hundred feet of trees. So those were actually, they're at an angle, greater, and they're across more of the hilltop and more across the, all these trees. So we're really excited about that. And they're actually, right now, they've been here almost a month, and they had a couple of slow days because we had like 21 inches of snow, and they could work in that, but one day they couldn't get to work. So that was one day. And then they had a couple other things going on that kind of slowed them down a little bit. And they get most of the roads made, but they haven't started on the lunar major north and south specifically. They've done some ends on them kind of, but they haven't, so we haven't opened them up yet. I think probably in the next week or two, probably by the time the winter solstice occurs, we'll have some of them starting to open up for the first time. And we'll have the winter solstice on Saturday the 20th. And because for Scott Walters, you mentioned earlier, he's going to visit us on the 19th coming up. And he's going to go to the Newport Tower. I think he's got a lecture in the Boston area. So it should look pretty neat for people that haven't seen the place for a year or two. And like yourself, you haven't been up there for about 4 years, so you'll be pretty surprised on the next visit. We go up there every day, and we're shocked. In fact, my daughter-in-law, she lives next to us. She got lost in the woods just because it's so disorientating. They're opening up trails and stuff. And I get up there, and I'm like, where the heck am I? I've been here, I've been coming here since 1955 as a little kid. And I actually, myself, I had to stand there and go, wait a minute, where the heck's the trails? In which direction am I? It looks so different, It's amazing. And the hill looks bigger. The walls look pretty cool. The walls really start to stand out without all the brush and all the trees, all the stuff on top of them. And one thing will look real nice is the blueberry bushes are going to take over that hill, and they kind of have, starting in '67. So we have that blueberry season. It's going to be pretty phenomenal up there, and they do kind of keep down some of the weeds. So it's going to look really pretty with the blueberry bushes. 4,000 years ago, the hill probably was mostly bare. And 100 shovel test pit study that we've done with our archaeologist has been with us since 1989. She's still doing them. And we got close to 100, almost 1 per acre. And her husband was a doctor of geology from Tufts University for 30 years. So between the two of them, like good geology and good archaeology. And she said it looks like the hilltop was 75% bare about 4,000 years ago. Her estimate was, it could be, pretty close to it. And so bedrock, and then about 25% covered with glacial soils, and some vegetation. So the original people, when they looked at the hill, it was a fairly open hill. And I think the hills around here, too, are also more open and not forested the way it is today. There's a lot of, bedrock with a few trees and brush, that kind of thing. So a much more open place. And we're kind of returning in a little bit in that direction, So it's pretty amazing.
Okay, and Dennis, when you have a crew of guys out there in the winter, I really wouldn't want to be working outside during a New England winter, but how is dealing with that kind of climate different from being there in July in shorts and a t-shirt and doing all the work? Is actually the frozen grounds better to protect a archaeologically sensitive area?
Yeah, definitely. And that's one reason we pushed it towards winter, to have the ground frozen. And it has been for about most of the time they've been here. It's been freezing up pretty good. We've had a couple of warmer days with the rain, and it caused a little bit of muddiness, in a couple of areas where it was very wet land, kind of a little bit of damp area anyway. But yeah, in the summertime, if it's very dry, it wouldn't be too bad either. But if you have, like, spring would be bad. New England has mud season, that's a bad time to do it. The tiles, they have track vehicles, and they have these gigantic wheels with chains on them, and they would, in the spring, make a total mess. They would sink up to their axles, in the mud. But we do have a lot of bedrock there, so, they're riding over that with a thin layer of soil. But there's some areas where the soil's deeper, and then you get into that area, and you can go up to your axle in that. So it's better to have it frozen, and that's why we really said we'd like it to be done in the winter. The number of tourists coming through, much less than the summertime, of course. And we want that ground frozen and hard. It will help protect any archaeological things underneath it,
Sure.
So, yeah, it's better. And, the equipment they're using is all air conditioned. They get heat, and I think they get cooling in the summer. So they're in closed cabs, completely enclosed. They're listening to music, I guess. And they actually have, I believe, have a screen in there, and they can get, commands from their supervisors saying, hey, we need you over here, something like that. So it's all done in safety, and it's done very, very nicely. And the guy music, he just plays it when he's having his lunch. They actually eat in the equipment. They have the lunch right in the equipment. They stop, eat, and then they continue on. And everything's about safety and everything. But yeah, they're doing a great job. Yeah, so winter's better for that. Definitely, if the ground's frozen. And they put down some logs too in some bad areas, so they won't go into, they won't dig into the soil. A little bit that's going to happen anyway. But
right. Well, that's just aspects of historic preservation that probably a lot of people don't think about. I was just kind of wondering, is this the preferred time of the year to do that? But that's interesting. So, with the some of the trees being removed, and you also marked where some of the quarried stones were and other places of interest. Has anything been discovered, or have you made any new realizations with some of the trees coming down, or like when the roots, if any of the roots have come up? Are you finding any artifacts in the root balls?
We are keeping our eye open for that. Most of it is, except for the what they call a staging area, which is about an acre, where they have all the equipment that loads the trucks with the logs and also the wood chips. That area, they did pull the stumps out of there, and I was keeping an eye on that. And that already had been looked at with a shovel test pit study, as I mentioned. But we're keeping our eyes open for any kind of stone tools or anything that would look interesting, because one of the things we're trying to locate is where these people would have lived. They may have not lived, on top of the hill. They may have lived down near the Spigot River, unfortunately, the Spigot River is right at the bottom of our hill on the west side. It's a tributary of one of the larger rivers in New England called the Merrimack River. But that's where that's where all the homes went in. A lot of them went in since the 1980s, but even if you go back into the 1800s and even a little bit earlier, there's some homes down here that go back a couple hundred years. And that would be, I think, where these ancient people would live. They would live in hide, wood, or bark houses, something that's perishable. Very similar to what happened over in Europe with the megalithic sites. Most of them are tombs, temples, and monuments, and not domiciles or places where people live. And just with all the modern equipment we have, like LiDAR and satellites, are starting to discover where these people lived, like they built Stonehenge, for instance. But it's been frustrating for archaeologists for years. It's like, where did they live? They built these magnificent stone ruins, but they didn't live in them. So where did they live? What they lived in is now gone. It's underneath the ground, and maybe there's some stone tools. Maybe there's some ceramics at a later date, that kind of thing, fire pits, maybe even some burials. But so we're keeping a really close eye on that. We had 21 inches of snow right after they really got going up there, covered everything. We still have snow covering the ground up here. It's in the last day or so, we lost quite a bit of it, but everything got completely buried up there, So I think in the spring, and because they're going to finish up within a month, I think, next spring is when we're going to get out there and start really looking around, taking more photographs. And we have a guy that has a thermal imaging camera that he's done quite a bit of work for us over the last couple of years, and he has a high definition camera too. And this thermal imaging camera can see details in the ground that you can't see with your eye, down to about 14 inches. I think it was a $12,000 camera he mentioned, and his drone was like about a $6,000 drone. And he switched the cameras out from high definition to the thermal imaging. And he said when he's done, he's going to rent this software. It's like $360 a month or something like that. Process all that data, and we'll have a 1 square mile, which will contain the entire hill. It'll be a 3D model of the hill. But the problem with this equipment, it doesn't like trees. If you use LiDAR, which he's used before, but he prefers thermal imaging, LiDAR isn't bothered by trees, but the thermal imaging camera is. It just leaves a big blank on the picture. It doesn't know what to do with the pine tree or when the leaves are on the deciduous trees. So he's worked in the spring and he's worked in the fall after the leaves have fallen off. But now with the thinning of the forest, if you come back with that equipment, and maybe that's when we'll start to see some patterns up there that, without the trees in the way. And I'm really interested to see what some of the serpentine walls look like, because we can see some of them in this they look beautiful in his imagery, except, there'll be a couple pine trees and you lose the picture, the whole thing, you don't see the whole, like one of them is 165 feet long, roughly, one of our serpentine walls shaped like the letter S, and it has a big triangular head. But there's a big pine tree on the head side of it, so you can see part of the body and how it just kind of goes across the landscape in this big S, and then you just lose it in his imagery. It's under a pine tree, which, doesn't lose its needles, So that's what we're kind of looking at. Yeah, and I think we're going to see some other things. I noticed the walls, because you have a new road that goes around by the astronomical alignments. And if you look at it from the other side, which we really haven't because there's been so thick a forest there, but it isn't now, and you look back at the wall and you can see the undulating shape of the wall like the back of the snake much better. It's like almost unidirectional, It's like, wow, that really shows up from this angle. The same thing that happened in Connecticut, not Stonington, but 400 serpentine walls. And there's other stone walls that are like some of them are only 10 or 20 feet across. That's it. And the gentleman that wrote the book called Ceremonial Stoneworks is the unidirectional. You can walk on one side of this wall, it's only 20 feet. And that's the length of the wall. It doesn't make sense for a farm at all. And you don't really see it. You go on the other side, oh, what a beautiful artistic piece of stonework, But they don't serve any purpose. There's no purpose to them. So I was in the western part of the site, looking back towards the site out near the winter solstice and going towards the spring and fall equinox sunset. I was looking to the east, though, the opposite direction I normally look. I'm like, whoa, that looks really cool. You can actually see the humping in the wall up and down. And that is part of a 2,550-foot serpent wall, we think. So that kind of thing, we might, see more of that, from different perspectives, looking at something, kind of unidirectional, like, wow, that looks pretty cool. It was all buried in the woods. We couldn't see it before. So, by the way, North Stonington had 100 acres of their land done last year by a licensed forester in Connecticut. And some of the people from that project actually spoke at the spring meeting this year at the New England Antiquities Research Association. They had pictures and everything, and they described, what they did, why it was done, how it was done, and what the results were. Because one of the problems is these trees, they grow next to the walls or chambers. If the tree gets blown over when it uproots, it destroys the wall or structures. Or
Right.
if the tree falls on top of the walls, it causes a lot of damage, And so that's one of the things is we're backing away these trees away from the walls, and that's one thing we told them. We want the walls clear of the trees so we can not only photograph them from the air and from the ground, and people can see them that are touring our site, but we don't want damage to these, I mean, you can see where some of the walls have been, the tree has fallen on the wall and knocked over one of the, particularly the standing stones, the big slabs of stone stood up. Sometimes they get knocked over when a tree hits them, They may be multi-ton. They might have been there for centuries, but you get a big tree crashing down. And our forester said the average pine tree up there at our place is over 1,000 pounds, and you get that weight come crashing down on top, it's going to move the stone, for sure, and cause damage. So we are backing away trees from in the roots too, You get the trees away from these things, So that's one of the big projects we're doing, and we're really, really excited about this whole thing.
And speaking of, just say a tree knocking over, standing stone. One of the more interesting stones you showed me was that 14-foot menhire that was recently discovered, and really enjoyed seeing the stones that were quarried on site, and there's like a small stone under one end, like it was going to be propped up and moved to a location, and you've been finding a lot more of those that suggest that the property was suddenly abandoned. With that amount of stones that were quarried and left for whatever reason, there's obviously the original idea was for a much bigger calendar, greater function than what is there today. Have you been able to tell where some of these stones were going to be taken, or what they could have been aligned to just by where they were left?
Yeah, that's a good question. We really don't know the answer. Some of the stones are pretty close to the site. There's one actually between one of the structures called the Watch House, which we believe is the head of the 2,550-foot serpent. And the Watch House is a pretty cool structure. It's a big, glacial boulder with a structure built to the left side of it. If you're looking into it, there are 50 of that. There's 50 of that design in New England, in the north, not just New England, but the Northeast. Is about 50 of that same design. Big glacial boulder, natural, left by the glaciers, and the structure built on the left side of it. So that kind of architecture carries out throughout the Northeast. There's about 50 of them we found so far like that. And between that and the main site's probably about 300 feet. And right then in the center, we found one. It's one of the smallest actually quarried stones that we found still in its, in its socket, in situ they call it. And I kind of noticed it back about 5 to 6 years ago, and we've been walking by it for decades. And there it was, all propped up. And I looked at it, and I looked at the edges of it closer. And on what they did is they dressed the stone or shaped the stone, and sometimes the stone will come out. They like it except for one edge, and they'll actually touch up that edge to make it, the shape they want. And I looked at it, and one of the edges had that serrated edge where somebody had been taking a hammerstone and they were beating on it just like an arrowhead to knock off little flakes, and they were shaping it. And I drew that attention to that stone to Dr. David Stewart Smith, and he goes, "Oh my God, it's been right here, right in front of us all these years." He goes, "Oh, that's really cool. That's great. You found that." So pretty close to the site. But some of the stones are up to 1,000 feet from the main site and down the hill. And these stones look like they were the type of stones you would use either for like when they built the chambers, they built, sack stones for the most part, just stones laid out horizontally. And they just, increased the height and on top they put these gigantic stones that are what we call roof slabs. And they're generally some of the biggest stones on the site. These roof slabs are multi-ton, and they're a lot of them are oval shaped, and they all fit together. And like in the oracle chamber, one of the biggest structures, as an example, the roof never leaks in here, even though it consists of multiple roof slabs across. And it's if you look down at the oracle chamber, it's kind of shaped like the letter Y. And then it's orientated true north and south, and that avenue is almost 30 feet in length. And then it has a branch that goes east and west. And it consists of a lot of the different types of stones. It has a couple of glacial stones in there. They actually split one in half, and they used it for the structure, kind of like anchor stones. That's on the eastern part of the chamber. And it has big blocks of stone that make up the walls, the vertical walls. And then on top of all this is these gigantic roof slabs, but not the biggest roof slabs. One of the bigger ones is adjacent to that in the chamber. That's actually a 2-story building. And the first floor's roof, which is also the floor for the second story, is about almost 30,000 pounds. Granite weighs about 163 pounds per cubic foot. So if you just come up with the dimensions, you can figure out what the stone weighs. And that stone's enormous. And that one was only moved about, it was moved about 15 feet from its quarry site. It was actually an earthquake fault line. The whole hill is split in half. And they utilized that crack for one edge of the stone. It's perfectly straight. And then they had to shape the other 3 sides of it and then transport it about 15 feet. But similar sized stones are up to 1,000 feet down the hill from the main site. And I think they were intended as roof slabs or what we call orthostats. And an orthostat is a big slab that stood on its end and generally kind of rectangular in shape, generally. The east-west chamber has a couple of these as examples. And there's a structure that's missing next to it. Back in the 1800s, some of the stones were taken away from our site. We think possibly a third of the site's missing today due to quarry activities, and they were using some of the stones for local building projects, hauling them down the hill, which is unfortunate. But that happens to sites all over the world, whether it's the pyramids in Egypt losing their limestone caps, or even Avebury. I've been to Avebury, and some of the stones are missing from Avebury. That's near Stonehenge. And Stonehenge itself is missing some stones, and that's a worldwide thing. It's a problem, with vandalism and people not appreciating, respecting, or understanding what these sites are due to education, and information and all that. And people say, "No, I like that. I'm going to take that and use it for my project." So there is one right next to that east-west chamber, the same kind of big slab, and it's fallen over. But in the 1930s, it was still standing in the first photographs taken. It looks like it was another big chamber with orthostats and roof slabs. The roof slabs are gone. One orthostat, which is a big stone. And sometime in the 1940s, I don't know what happened. It could have been an earthquake or just it settled, and the whole thing fell over and the top of it busted off. But it's very similar to the ones in what we call the east-west chamber. So the type of stone that we're finding quarried, we're either going to be like roof slabs or wall slabs, the orthostats we call them, or maybe, astronomical marker stones. And you asked me earlier, I think we have the 26 I mentioned, but the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, when they looked at our survey data from 1973 to 1977, we had a professional surveyor. His father was the president, I believe, of the New England Survey Association, so we got somebody very reputable. He's still around today. He's kind of retired from surveying just recently, like I retired, and he visited us last year. So we surveyed the site and sent all that data to the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in 77, and in 78 we get the results back. They said that if these were used for astronomical purposes, these stones would work about 1800 BC, and that agreed with the 1971 carbon dating of the main site, almost 4,000 years old. So they also mentioned, and this is something we have not figured this out yet. We need more people, and our last gentleman working on it died in 2002. He was a doctor of astronomy, archaeoastronomy actually, from Penn State. He'd been there for 30 years. About 22 years ago, he joined us, and he started working on looking at what we had already done for research on the astronomical alignments since 1967. He was also looking for other things such as a report from 1978 from Harvard said you have 24 star alignments. And one of them we knew, it was the North Star. Today it's Polaris, but 4,000 years ago it was Thuban. So he was working on identifying more alignments. So I think 26 plus 23 more, I think it's 49 alignments possibly at the site. And I don't know if the ancient people were going to add any more monoliths for other, for other star alignments or something like that. But, I think they had a much bigger complex, and I think they were still building the site. And just in the last few years, we went from finding maybe 15 or 18 of these big stones out there to 33 of these quarried stones. And most of them were just found in the last 3 or 4 years by myself and my son and a few other people. So I think they had a much bigger plan for the site. But then it dawned on us, it looks like they had something like a work in progress, and they stopped. And then the question is, why did they stop? What happened to them? Why didn't they finish it? And it really, it took me by surprise, actually, And so, because we all originally thought maybe the site was built, it was used, and then it was abandoned. Maybe it was reused again. And then, in the 17 and 1800s, people started settling in the area, and the site was complete, basically, But I think he had a much bigger plan for the site with all these stones all over the hilltop. And over in Europe, they call those stones that have not made it to the construction site lazy stones. So it's kind of a funny term. I don't think it's the fault of the stone, actually, but they actually would quarry it, start to shape it, prop it up, and then they would, get ready to transport it, and they just abandon it. And so the term lazy stone comes up, I guess. And so I thought that was kind of a cool term.
Okay. When people are there for the winter solstice celebration you have going on the is it the 22nd this year?
It's on Saturday. I think it's the 20th or 21st.
Okay. That in a couple weekends.
Yeah.
Are all of the stones for the different alignments, or is it all the same type of stone, or is there a different like sandstone and is used for one and limestone for another, or is there a specific meaning for the use of certain stones for the winter solstice sunrise, or just wondering?
Yeah, I know. Like at Stonehenge, they have the blue stones from Wales, right. And then they have the sassons from Marble Stone, which is a good question. It's pretty much granite, and it's okay. All the stones were pretty much from the hill, and the granite itself, it's made of up with quartz, gives it hardness. It has feldspar, it kind of gives it color, and then it has mica, and it gives it. Once you polish, you can polish it up like a gray stone. But it has we do have quartz and quartz crystals on the hill, but it's pretty much all granite, yeah. And unlike the difference at Stonehenge, so it's all local stone. Although some of it was dried probably 1,000 feet, like some of the ones that are still out there, some of the lazy stones. But it's granite, and other than that, the boulders, like the Watch House big boulder, they were deposited there by the glaciers. So those things are not from the hill; they came from probably somewhere northwest. And if you get a geologist, he might be able to even identify, because we have a lot of big boulders on the hill, and some of them were incorporated into the astronomical alignments, such as the Watch House boulder. It's a February 1st and a lunar minor. So that's a pretty complex structure. We never appreciated the Watch House for what it was, And actually, the entrance of the Watch House, we had a app on a phone called Sunseeker, and one of my friends, or Haley, last spring got in there, and she aimed it and everything. And I thought, in the back wall of that Watch House, if you look from the outside looking in, there's a stone in the back wall that's very, very light in color, almost white,
Mm-hmm.
And when you take pictures, it really stands out. And it looks intentional, because the rest of the stones are more like a darker, grayer granite, And this and this stone's very light. And when you put the sun seeker on it, it looks like, and we're going to see it now because we're opening up that avenue with the forestry project. We should be able to see in the spring equinox if the sunlight comes up, and there won't be any trees in the way for the first time, that we've been there. And the sunlight should go into that chamber around 9 o'clock in the morning and illuminate that stone. And it's funny because in Newgrange in Ireland, in the winter solstice, not the equinox like this, the sunlight goes through that avenue, and I've been there, that, it goes right through that window over the entrance of Newgrange, and it goes into the chamber about almost, 65 feet. And it illuminates the back of the chamber about 9 o'clock. And the Newport Tower, I think, if I got my story correct, and I've read quite a bit about the Newport Tower, and I've seen Scott's show, I think around 9 o'clock is when the egg is illuminated on the winter solstice also. So 9 o'clock, we're going to try to watch that. We'll get there a little bit early next spring. Hopefully the weather's good, and the sun will go into that chamber, and we'll see what happens,
Yeah, that reference to Newgrange and what you said earlier about went up in 1967 to just experiment to see if the winter solstice sunrise happened over one rock. But it's when I think about the construction of Newgrange, how many winter solstices did they have to sit there? Those cloudy Irish, mornings, waiting for the sun to actually shine to get that rock put in place in the precise location for the sun to illuminate it.
Yeah, that's a problem. I know.
Yeah. So how many generations or 10, 15 years did it just sit there waiting for those few minutes on December 21st?
Right. Even at our site, we had to wait 3 years to actually watch it. But yeah, you can actually watch those alignments. So the sun, the solstice. The sun stands still in that case. It'll be about a couple of days. You can actually watch it before it starts moving in a different, back in the other direction. So, but you're right. Yeah, if they had weather, it could be a couple of days of bad weather. Now you've missed it. You got to wait till next year, and then the same thing could happen the next year. So. That's a really good question. And then they talk to climatologists about, what were the weather conditions back. Newgrange goes back almost 5,300 years, I guess, when they started constructing it, something around that. And did they have a little drier weather pattern back then? And it might have been a little warmer too. I know around the time of Stonehenge, some people thought maybe the stones from Marlborough Downs, about 18 miles from Stonehenge, for the biggest 50-ton stones, might have been dragged on. There's a river called the Avon River there, and maybe it was frozen. But when they looked at it, the climatologist said, well, no, it was a warmer time period, so that river wouldn't have frozen. It would never frozen to hold a 50-ton stone. So then, maybe they floated the stones down. So they're looking at climate too. One thing about Stonehenge too, we have a tree problem today at our site. We love our trees, but they're in the way of the alignments, and causing some damage. And that's true all over the Northeast, But over almost 5,000 years ago with Stonehenge, they had actually a forest problem there. We had the opposite. We had very few trees probably 4,000 years ago, but 5,000 years ago, Stonehenge had a forest. And then they consumed a lot of the wood, for fires, for building, and for, logs for probably rollings, for building the site. So they don't have a tree problem. It's pretty open today,
Yeah, they made Woodhenge too.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, and they used up wood for that. But yeah, they don't have when you go to Stonehenge today, it's pretty open, pretty open countryside around there. I've been there, I think, 4 times. But almost 5,000 years ago, they had a forest. So it's like, what did they do to clear the trees so they could watch the alignments, They were using a lot of wood, consuming it. But, did they actually cut out avenues in the trees so they could actually watch this? It's something I guess next time I visit, they'll ask some of the people over there about that question, What do they think the people did? so they could see, just like we're doing. We're clearing out the avenues, with modern equipment today. But 5,000 years ago, what did they do over there? Just, keep cutting the trees and using the wood, and they did do cremation, so that would consume wood, and all the log rollers and all the levers and homes built out of that material probably. And so they had a tree problem, and we have the tree problem today. So as far as way of the alignments,
And speaking of Stonehenge, with the serpentine walls you've discussed, and the alignments that are opening up more, have you found that the megalithic yard was used as some kind of standard unit of measurements throughout your it sounds like there was, you have a couple examples, but it was a megalithic yard used on a more wider scale at America's Stonehenge?
We're going to have to look at that, Mark. The main site, the 1 acre where most of the chambers are, we seem to have found it in there, and I built that model back 40 years ago, and in the 70s, we have a diorama when you first walk into the visitor center, and I was doing some measurements for the model back in the 70s, and we were aware of the megalithic yard, which is 32 inches, 0.64, and it's found in megalithic sites of Europe. Dr. Alexander Tom, who we've met, actually discovered that. And it's found throughout Europe, but they're finding it in South America, Central America, and some of the mounds down in Louisiana, in Alabama. And we think that, we're going to have to get out and look at some of the walls, and see if they were based on the megalithic yard. Where a wall will go, and then maybe it turns, and bends and goes in a different direction, and then it's, and then it stops or something like that, because that's been, some of the serpentine walls just have a head, a body, and it stops. So I'm kind of curious as to what length they made these serpentine walls. There's about we have 12 of them at the site, anywhere from 30 feet up to 2,550 feet, roughly, It'll be interesting to see if the megalithic unit of measure was used in those. So that's a question we don't know yet. But I think that the force is clear. We can get out there and take, measurements. Maybe we can get that survey gentleman back, and he can help us with that. I did mention it to him, and he was kind of interested in that because he was not aware of the serpentine walls at all, So, yeah, that's something we're really interested in. In the main site, we need laser scanning, I think, use a laser scanner, and then we can measure those chambers very accurately, the height, width, and, the depth of these structures, and see if the megalithic yard was, in fact, used at our site. They're finding at some of the sites down in Hudson Valley, where there's over 200 chambers. That's the highest density of chambers, Westchester and Putnam County. And they are finding some of the megalithic units there, too. And in Connecticut, I've been told, too, by one of the vice presidents of NERA. He told me that, too. He goes, we're finding that. And when I mentioned another thing about, he goes, I wouldn't be surprised because we keep finding the megalithic yard used at different places, So it's fun. People have to get out and measure these structures, in order to determine that. So.
Okay, and when people congregate there on the December 21st for the winter solstice, are they going to see the same view that's on the cover of the book America's Stonehenge that it was co-authored by your dad and David Godsword?
Yeah, and that book came out in 2003, I think, and we're going to have a new book out, because it doesn't have a lot about the serpentine walls. We'll do more with the megalithic yards and more about the quarry sites, and also the windows. We didn't even mention the portals. Beautiful stone windows in these walls, and there's about 13 of those we've discovered just in the last 3 years. But yes, that is the winter solstice. I think that picture was taken in 1970. As I mentioned, that was the first year. And we went up there, and next year will be the 50th anniversary of that particular picture. So that's what they'll see. We will have it a little bit wider, because we're going to open up the avenue more. We should be able to see the sun. It will come down at an angle, and actually there's a beautiful rolling hill behind on the horizon, and the sun should kind of go right down that hill and then hit the top of the rock, just like the summer solstice. It should be pretty nice, especially when we're going to open it up now, wider than it's ever been opened up before, So. And it'll be on Saturday the 21st, and hopefully the weather is really good. It's a weekend. It could be a nice turnout. Depends on how the weather goes, and it's all dependent on that, of course.
Okay. And, we have about 5 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes left.
Wow.
So, how's the snowshoeing or the alpacas okay with this cold weather?
Yeah, they love it. They got nice thick fur right now. We sheared them in early June, and we do it once a year, and they're enjoying it. They've been running around the snow. They don't like walking in deep snow, so the snow's come down a little bit because of the warm couple of days and the rain we had, and they were out there running. Even our forester said, your 7 alpacas are going crazy up on the hill today running around. They were just out having a great time because they've been stuck indoors because of the 21 inches of snow we had. So yeah, they're doing very, very well. We'll have this celebration on Saturday the 21st also. We have a lady that's been doing it for almost 27 years now, I think. She does the summer solstice, she does the equinoxes, and then she'll have a celebration all planned out for the winter solstice. Again, if we have a blizzard, that could rain on, it could put we might be closed that day if we have a blizzard, but we have everything all planned out with activities and everything on the 21st Saturday. And like I mentioned, Scott Walters will be up a couple of days. He'll be up 2 days before that to come up and, check the site out. And he hasn't been up for about a year and a half. So we got some things coming up. And then the next one after that will be a cross-quarter day, about February 1st, right around Groundhog's Day. It's called In Block, and it's that will be the next one. That alignment will be over the watch house. So that will be open. We might be able to see that for the first time too, because the trees have never been cleared beyond it, and that will be another thing we'll be looking. So that's another big thing too. That will be the first time we might be able to actually see the sun, because there's so many trees. You can kind of tell where the sun comes up through the trees, but it's really hard to see it. Even if we have a lot of hardwoods too. But since it's going to be clear, it may actually be pretty nice to watch that this year,
Okay. And let's see. You're going to be open on, for the winter solstice, and you're closed on Christmas. If people want to stop up, see all the new views, get Scott's autograph. What they could go to your website.
Yeah.
Okay. What's StonehengeUSA.com?
Yeah, that's it. And then there's a email address if they want to send us a message. We can answer that. There's a phone number in there. Then we're on Instagram and Facebook, and we also have a free app download on your Apple phone or Android. And you go to the Google Play Store, I guess, and it's under America Stonehenge, a little logo. You'll see with it has one of the sunset. It's like a logo, and you can actually do a tour at your home if you like. The entire thing. It has pictures, text, and it talks to you. And if you come and visit us, you can use it and you can walk around with it. And people love that, Yeah, we have a 4-page tour guide map, and they take that with them anyway. But we started this about a year ago last summer, and everybody that's used it really enjoys it. For those that can't come and see us right away, or maybe ever, you can still do a whole tour of our site. Right on your smartphone at home in your lazy boy chair if you want. So, but so StonehengeUSA.com, they can check us out.
Okay, cool. Well. Yeah, Dennis, we have about another minute or so. Do you have any last minute things you want to plug, or next 2 guests are ready to go?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I'm excited about that because my dad was involved with some of those, like the Spirit Pond Rune Stones, and to some of the Newport Tower. He was involved with that in the 60s, and and I have a new book, as I mentioned, coming out. It'll probably be out in the spring. It should be an update of everything. So we're kind of excited about that too. And we might be on another brand new show on science. They've already filmed us, so Science Channel. We may be on something. We'll announce that on our website if that gets to go ahead. So kind of excited about that. So, but yeah, again, thank you so much for having me on tonight, Mark. And Barbara.
Thanks for giving us some behind the scenes information on what's going on up there, and we really appreciate it. And you can. We're going to switch over to our other two guests, and I just want to thank you for being kicking off the show tonight.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much, and I'll be talking to you again, Mark. Thank you, Barbara, and the listeners. Have a great holiday season. Talk to you later. Bye-bye now.
All right. Bye, Dennis.
Bye-bye.
And, we have had a couple guests just mentioned the Newport Tower as evidence of transatlantic voyages prior to Columbus, but we haven't really examined what the tower actually is. I think very quickly we're going to find out we have a historical conundrum with this artifact in Newport, Rhode Island. Steve DIMARZO and Patrick Shekleton are here to present their research into this enigmatic structure. Steve is returning after his appearance with us in May, where we discussed his heroic historic preservation and documentation efforts throughout New England, and he just surpassed documenting his 10,000th site. Congratulations, Steve. And Steve has led a project into deciphering and preserving the Narragansett Rune Stone, and making his debut on Nightlight is Patrick Shekleton. He has retired from a career in naval aviation, has worked with other advanced sciences, and is passionate about researching pre-Columbian contact. So welcome, Steve and Patrick.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, how are you two tonight?
Doing well.
There, Steve.
Good.
Yep.
Good. Okay, so we have I know I've looked at some maps, like the AAA books. They talk about in downtown Newport, there's the ruins of a windmill. I have a feeling that you disagree with that. So
big time.
Yeah.
The windmill description is the conventional wisdom. It's the mainstream point of view, where the early colonists of Newport, Rhode Island, constructed a stone tower to be used as a wind-driven grist mill, right? It's completely out of place. If it was constructed in the early colonial period, Newport was settled in 1639, so we're talking 1639 up to 1677. The later date being the first historical mention of the old stone mill in a written document. So, but the thing is it's an attractive theory. It resonates with the folks who have family in that area, who grew up in that area, whose relations were among the first colonial settlers over here in America. So it's an attractive idea, right? And the conventional wisdom is that Benedict Arnold or one of his cohorts during that time period happened to construct this stone tower, this stone mill. No one gave the Newport Tower much thought through the 1600s or 1700s or even the first part of the 1800s. It was something that was on the landscape. It really didn't gain notoriety until a gentleman over in Europe, last name is Roffin, was corresponding with someone there in Rhode Island who had sent him some drawings of this enigmatic stone tower over there, and it was Roffin who, and he was a scholar. He wrote, researched history. He was very well esteemed, and he took a look at the drawing, and he felt that it was either a Viking or Norse tower dating back to the first part of, back to the Viking era, which is 1000 AD, and then the Norse followed along on the timeline there. So that's when the notoriety for the Newport Tower started to build, right? It was initially proposed that it was a Viking tower over in North America. It appealed to a lot of people for the early exploration of North America. And then things have developed from that time period. That was in the 1830s, 1840 time period when that theory came up. And it's been controversial ever since. Proponents for the Viking theory, and then on the flip side, it was folks who were adamantly against that, who believe that it was a product of the early colonial period.
Okay, so like some of the earliest documentation is that it is mentioned by 1639, and it just doesn't sound like Miles Standish just walked off the Mayflower and built this windmill. And
right.
Steve's research into cartography, he sent some really interesting information, and this tower seems like it predated the Pilgrims settling in the Plymouth Bay colony by a very long period. Steve, can you tell us a little bit about some of the earliest documentation of the Newport Tower showing up on the maps?
Yes, but before I do that, I just want to give you an idea of why we began this research in the first place.
Okay. Sure.
Pat and I wanted to try to prove one way or the other, and we were satisfied if we found evidence that the tower was actually built in the colonial period. We would be satisfied if we could prove that. Or if we could prove that it was not built in the colonial period, that would be exciting. So that is what began our quest several years ago, to find out if the Newport Tower was indeed, as they say by modern academics, people in academia, that it's a colonial artifact. We believed that let's look at some evidence and see if we can find either way if this is indeed a true fact or if it is indeed something medieval. So that's what began our quest. And so since there really is nothing in writing, there's nothing in writing at all that says, well, when the colonists came, we saw this tower there, so we decided to co-opt it. There's nothing in writing, nothing in literature. There's nothing in medieval manuscripts, nothing. So Pat and I put our heads together. We said, well, what other place can we look to find evidence? So that began our quest, looking into maps. And Pat can certainly take it from that point.
Yep.
Okay.
So let's step back a bit. So let's talk about what actually exists in the historical record in written form about the Newport Tower. Okay, I mentioned previously in 1677 there was actually in early 1677 there was a land deed which made an oblique mention to the stone mill. A very brief passage, no real descriptive details, but they certainly were referring to the area which we know as Turrell Park today, and they, by using the combination of words of stone mill, they're also referring to what we know as the Newport Tower, right? So that was in early 1677 in a land deed. Later on that year, Benedict Arnold did a codicil to his will, where he made specific mention of the old stone mill. That was the descriptive phrase. Now, that is a pretty, that's the second written mention in the same year referring to the old stone mill. Now, a will is it's a different type document in the sense that most last wills and testaments will do a listing of one's personal property and how that's to be divided between the heirs. So there wasn't a lot of detail. There was a mention of it, and it's the first mention. Now, what doesn't exist prior to 1677 in any way, shape, or form is any type of written documentation of the construction of a mill by the colonist, right? Doesn't exist. It's not in the historical record. Some folks felt that it was written on some of the early deeds there in Newport, but that's not the case. There's absolutely no mention prior to 1677 in any of the town records for the city of Newport, right? And then there was very little written mention of the mill thereafter, up until the early 1800s when Rothman turned it into a Viking tower, right? The only mentions for the old stone mill were in a series of property deeds within the Arnold family, and then being passed down to their heirs, right? So it doesn't exist, essentially, any written records of it. Now, in the 1840s, 1850 time frame, there was an author who came through, and he was documenting. He was on like a travel journey, and so he was documenting the different cities and locations in New England, and he happened to pass through Newport, and in his book he made mention that there was no written records aside from the deeds, but more importantly, there was no oral history of who had built the Newport Tower. So collectively, up there in Rhode Island, it was an enigma even back in the early 1800s. No one could recollect in any type of fashion who had actually constructed the Newport Tower. Oral tradition, nothing was passed down, okay? And they even queried one Native American tribe as to whether or not they knew who built the tower. And at that time, now there's multiple tribes that were in the Narragansett Bay area, right? But as was written in that book I'm referring to, the Native Americans did not know who had constructed the tower. So just need to get that on record. Now, Steve did do some research, and he did find that there's an interesting mention with regards to Old Plymouth in a book that was written in the 1670s by a gentleman named John Joslin. He's presumed to have been a physician over in England. He was very well educated. His brother was one of the early settlers over in New England, working for Sir Ferdinando Gorges. So his brother was connected into the political class over in New England. And the interesting thing is that John Joslin, now he initially, his first visit to New England was in the 1638 time period, and then he went back to England for a bit, and then he returned for another 8-9 year stretch in the 1660s, right? And he spent quite a bit of his time up in Maine, where his brother was involved with politics, with the governance of that particular area in that time frame. But anyways, in his book, he does and the Joslins were explorers, right? And we know that because they write about it in their book. They traveled throughout New England. John Joslin cataloged the flora and the fauna and the other stuff, and in this section where he's doing this description of coming up the coast from the south and into the Narragansett Bay area, and he talks about Old Plymouth, and he remarks that it was the first plantation that the English attempted to settle there in New England, but it failed. And he's very specific. He pinpoints Old Plymouth as being on Aquidneck Island. He uses descriptive terms such as the Narragansett River, and he makes very clear that there was an old abandoned plantation there at the south end of Aquidneck Island, and he assigned the remnants of that plantation to Bartholomew Gosnold, who was an explorer who came to New England once in 1602. Now the issue is that Gosnold was never in Narragansett Bay. Gosnold was out on Cuttyhunk Island, a little bit displaced away from Narragansett Bay up in the Cape Cod area, right? So it's an interesting twist that you have someone who's recording the history of New England, who was there on Aquidneck Island, who cited the Old Plymouth plantation, or at least he wrote of it, right? It's not clear whether or not he personally visited it or he got the information from someone else, but he's very explicit in his description, so we know it's Aquidneck Island. And he says that there's an old plantation.
Now, Mark, this is taken, I'm going to quote directly from John Joslin's writings in his book. This is from his book. Sure, this is his writing. He says, the next place of note on the Main is Narragansett Bay, within which bay is Rhode Island, a harbor for the Shunammite Brethren, as the saints errant, the Quakers, who are rather to be esteemed vagabonds than religious persons. At the further end of the bay, by the mouth of the Narragansett River, on the south side, there was an old Plymouth plantation, dated 1602. That is his words in his book, referring to Old Plymouth being a plantation on Aquidneck Island. And then what Pat did, he found a map from William Wood that actually shows Old Plymouth on a map that he drew. And Pat was able, through wonderful working latitudes, finding points of reference for latitudes, he was able to determine that Old Plymouth is in the exact location in latitude as the current city of Newport, Rhode Island today. And that was it. That was our first real big break, leading us toward finding evidence of the Newport Tower being probably older than what the consensus had been, that it was a 17th century colonial artifact.
Okay, and just to incorporate ancillary evidence, there are the Spirit Pond stones. Like there are three of them. One of them was dated to 1402. So we have a very good possibility that this structure could be contemporary with the Spirit Pond stones, maybe some kind of European transatlantic visitor was here. There are several of these enigmatic artifacts that were found not too far from each other. How does when we look at all this information, how does all this help to confirm a more precise dating of the tower? And then we have to get into the cement as well, but maybe we could look at the dating of these stones first.
Yep. So let's be clear on a few things. Even though the Spirit Pond Rune Stones discovered in 1971 by Walter Elliott, 3 stones, uses the Junger Foodhark system of runic characters. One of the stones contains a map, but they're generally considered, and this is the conventional wisdom, that they are a hoax, right? So that's the prevailing wisdom on the Spirit Pond Rune Stones. Now I kind of think contrary to the conventional wisdom on a lot of things, but the Spirit Pond Rune Stones. So there's one aspect about the Spirit Pond, and I've done some research on the Spirit Pond Rune Stones. So there's actually a sequence of numbers and cardinal headings on the stones, and it was something that I ran across about 5 years ago, and actually it's the entire reason why I'm started to engage in this type of research, right? And I saw the numbers and the cardinal headings, and then I went and I read the Kensington Rune Stone, the inscription for the Kensington Rune Stone, and they also contain. Yep, and of course that's way out in the Midwest. That's dated 1362, and right there in the inscription, there's a series of numbers and headings. So I picked up on that on a Saturday afternoon, like 5 years ago, and it struck me. Those numbers and headings struck me as some type of geodetic or geographic information. They look like geographic coordinates, and I picked up on that because I'd been researching the history of Phippsburg, Maine for 4 years prior to that, and I'd spent a year and a half diving into the old land deeds dating back. First land deed started there in 1659. And I would map out these the parcel boundaries from these deeds. They're called bets and bounds, right? And so I'd spent a lot of time reading these old documents and doing that type of stuff. So when I read the inscriptions, it struck me, hey, those look like geographic coordinates. Now, I was, I said, well, if I'm going to tackle this, I got to be absolutely objective about this. First off, it's strange to find that combination on two of the most controversial rune stones here in the United States, right? Secondly, I'd have to prove that the number and cardinal headings worked into some type of pattern that would confirm that they were geographic coordinates. And then after that, we'd have to assess it to see, well, could they have done it in the 1300s and 1400s? Could they have done longitude and latitude? In other words, are those geographic coordinates, are they indicative of the fact that the rune stones are hoaxed or whether they're authentic, okay? So that's how I got started into this stuff. So Spirit Pond, 1401, 1402 dating parallels fairly closely within a few decades of the Kensington Rune Stone being 1362. You have another rune stone on the East Coast, which Steve has researched, the Narragansett Rune Stone. There's no date assigned to that rune stone. It does use an older, it uses older runes on that rune stone, Anglo-Frisian. Those runes were replaced by the Jungfraujoch around 900 AD. But that doesn't mean that the inscription was done 900 AD or prior. It just means that someone used the older runic alphabet in crafting that inscription, whether it was something that was done in the 1300s, 1400s, or whether a modern hoaxer decided to use that particular runic alphabet to do that. And then you have the Newport Tower, right? So the argument about the Newport Tower, first off, it's a colonial tower dating from the mid-17th century or so, or it's earlier. And there's been carbon dating that's been done on the mortar on the tower, and the results of that carbon dating were published back in 1995, and the verdict off the carbon dating of the mortar is that it was a colonial era tower, right? Now, so that's where we're at. That's the starting point, right? So for all these things, it's not a question of who did it. It's a question of examining the conventional wisdom right now to see if the consensus opinion is valid and can be supported, right? And if not, then like Steve mentioned, we have to produce objective evidentiary proof to move the needle on these objects, right? So Spirit Pond, Narragansett, Kensington Rune Stone. Our big focus, though, really is on the Newport Tower because there's more information related to the Newport Tower that was potentially available in the historical record. So Steve and I have focused on that primarily.
So
okay.
after Pat found the map and was able to delineate that Old Plymouth was actually Newport, Rhode Island, then we began to go in a certain direction. We said, why don't we look at some maps? So we started to look at some maps. Our next discovery was the Valesco map, 1610. It shows a lot of detail, and a lot of people thought it was a hoax because it showed so much detail for such an early date in history. But focusing in on where Aquidneck Island was, I noticed there was an orange dot on the southern end of the island. So I sent Pat the email and the map. He took a look at it. He says, geez, that's pretty interesting. Why would somebody put an orange dot someplace like where Newport was located after we had just found the William Wood map of 1634? So we said, well, look, let's expand our exploration. So we went to other maps. In fact, Pat found this book called The Iconography of Manhattan Island. It has a lot of maps in it. So I was going through the book, and I saw this map, 1639 by John Daniel. So I blew it up, took a couple of pictures of it, and sure enough, on the end of Aquidneck Island was a rectangular structure that had an X through it. We didn't know what the X was at the time. We've since come to believe that it represented what was a windmill, possibly. So
that makes sense.
Sending all this information to Pat, he got excited. He was able to get a clearer picture of the map, and then that began our quest to look at all maps, whatever maps we could get our hands on, and thankful to Pat and his diligent perseverance in looking at maps. To date, I think we have close to 80 maps ranging from 1639 back to 1300. And Pat will go into detail about some of these that show or depict the Newport Tower in various sizes, shapes, and that all depended upon the cartographer's mindset of how he wanted to show the Newport Tower. So, it's been an exciting couple of years.
Steve.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, the research that Steve and I are doing in looking for illustrations of a tower on the North American landscape in the Narragansett Bay Area, there's no real special skill or tools that anyone needs to do this type of research, right? And the reason why it's real simple. We try to get high resolution digital images of these maps, right? So we do a pre-screening to see if there's potentially an illustration in the area, right? There's indications. If you see an outline, if you see something that looks like a tower, then you got to kind of verify it, right? So then we go out, we order from museums if it's not available online, high resolution photographs, and they send them our way, and then we take those photographs or images, we take a snippet from it, we drop it into PowerPoint, and then we adjust the contrast and brightness, which is a very common technique when you're looking at old documents, right? The ink's faded, the photograph may have been too brightly lit when it was taken. So you make those types of adjustments, and those adjustments are made to every single pixel that's on the image. So we're not, in a Hollywood style, creating some type of illustration or some type of feature on the map, right? And so you do that. Now, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, doing that, using that type of methodology, I just couldn't be done, right? We live in an era where access to cartographic products has vastly improved because we have the internet, right? Secondly, folks have been digitizing their archives, first and foremost to preserve those artifacts in the event that there's a fire, an earthquake, or something like that, right? it's a common thing. Folks are digitizing their archives, and all the credit goes to the curators and the archivists at all these places that have these globes and these maps, right? They've done a fantastic job. And then having the ability to sit at a desk in your house and merely work these images on your laptop computer or on your computer, I mean, it's very simple, right? 25 years ago, you'd have to climb into an airplane and spend money and fly around. And if you didn't have the ability to adjust the contrast and brightness of the images, you wouldn't pick up on a lot of these things. So we're thankful that, technology has really made this type of research. It has enabled it to be done, right? So we're taking advantage of that. So like Steve mentioned, we started looking at maps, right? We found some indication. Our first focus was in the early 1600s, right? William Wood map, 1639 John Daniel map. Then Steve found a map from 1631 that showed the tower inside Narragansett Bay. And then the more maps that we did where we could validate a feature there in Narragansett Bay, the easier it became because we knew what to look for, what qualified, and then we moved on. Now, the interesting thing, probably like the 10th map that we did was a map that was made in 1631 by Visconti. I pronounce it Maggiolo. It may be Maiolo. A lot of alternate spellings there. But supposedly he was a great cartographer. He was very prolific. He made a lot of maps, starting from around 1508 and then extending up to the 1550s, 1560 time period. And then his son actually was a cartographer, and he was producing maps as well. And we actually found the tower on Visconti Maggiolo's son's map. But anyways, Maggiolo purportedly accompanied Verrazzano over to North America on Verrazzano's 1524 exploration. And Verrazzano came across the ocean, made landfall down in South Carolina area, went south for like 60 miles, then he turned around and started coming up the coast. And the big thing about Verrazzano's voyage is that he hauled into Narragansett Bay and spent 15 days in Narragansett Bay, right? And then and it was a fantastic visit. Maggiolo wrote a letter upon his return to France in July of 1524, where he describes the exploration, the journey. He spends quite a bit of time talking about Narragansett Bay, the Native Americans, the customs, the lifestyle, and the other stuff. So a very descriptive letter. What he didn't write about overtly in his letter was the Newport Tower, right? So that's just how it is. But anyways, Maggiolo, who accompanied Verrazzano, he crafted some fantastic maps. The first one was dated 1527. Unfortunately, that map was destroyed over in Europe during World War II. There were some reproductions of the map made, and there's a color photograph, but you can't use reproductions in this type of work, and you have to have a good image to make sure that to validate the features that you're looking at, right? So after 1527, Maggiolo produced another map in 1531, and on that 1531 map, he illustrated the Newport Tower. He illustrated a feature within Narragansett Bay in the northeast quadrant of the bay that is clearly a tower structure. And it has a cross coming out the top of the structure, boom, right there. it's similar to other features that Steve and I have found illustrated on maps in the Narragansett Bay. So we just, we're still working the map stuff. We're up to 80 right now. Once we get into 2020, and we built slide decks, and we shared a lot of this. Most of the map work that we've done, we've shared on Facebook, out on the internet. Some of the maps that we've ordered via special photography, there's restrictions on placing it out in public domain because those photographic images aren't our property, right? But eventually we'll publish and we'll have those images included in there. But,
okay, and Pat, I was just going to say, okay, so 1531 is, one of the earliest dates on a surviving original map. You hear other theories about, the Newport Tower was a church. Just look at the symbolic 8 legs it stands on, and it's circular church. It shows European architectural ideas being in America. So it's could be a windmill or a church, but it shows that there was some
knowledge,
transatlantic crossing.
Awareness. Yep.
Yeah. Steve, you want to comment on that?
Well, I think one thing everyone has to understand is that you have to it's imperative that you get out of the 21st century mindset when you look at these maps that go back 400, 500, 600 years. And the reason is that I've had people say, well, if a cartographer wanted to depict the Newport Tower, wouldn't he make it pristine and exact and put a roof on it and make it bright? And the answer is no, because we're thinking with a 21st century mindset. And all the maps that we've looked at, our perception has enlarged and increased to the point where we're beginning to understand that cartographers had their own special, unique way of depicting the Newport Tower. Sometimes it's a rectangle, sometimes it's round with a roof, sometimes it's a triangle with a roof, sometimes it's placed on land, sometimes it's placed in the water off the coast. That's just the way that was their mindset on how they wanted to depict the Newport Tower. So when I hear people say, well, you show them something, well, here's the Newport Tower, they say, well, don't you think it should have been more pristine? Well, yeah, maybe it should have been more pristine according to us, but you got to get out of the 21st century mindset in order to understand how these wonderful people who made these maps depicted the Newport Tower. Also, I just want to say, if not for Pat's ability to take these maps, because today's maps, you have latitude lines, longitude lines, they're precise. Back then, basically, latitude was basically known, but the continent of the East Coast or the continent of America, if you go way back, was not known. So when they put the Newport Tower on the map, sometimes it was off a couple of degrees or so, but Pat has been able to take these old maps and delineate the exact latitudes in order to precisely identify an item on a map that really has no latitudes. So that's been a great help in helping us to discover the Newport Tower on all these maps. So
Mark, here's what our focus is on the maps. Okay, it's Steve and I, our research, right now we're going through, we're identifying the maps that it's on. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. We got to catalog all the features on all these maps. We got to map out, not doing a pun there, but we got to map out the countries that the cartographers were from. We got to look for patterns in those relationships, right? And then we have to present a very coherent case that these tower features that we're finding are evidence of knowledge of the Newport Tower being over here in North America. So it's got to be very detailed. We got to discriminate very, very well with all these illustrations, and then we got to get it written up and then submitted for an academic review, right? Steve and I were just avocational researchers. We enjoy doing this type of work. So there's a lot of steps that need to be done well, and then we need to submit this, and it quite possibly might, we'd like to get it published after an academic review, but that's a ways down the road there. But I would say for avocational researchers, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort in taking research seriously. But you have to do it well. You have to be thorough. You have to be detailed. You have to consider all the possibilities. Then you have to do a coherent write-up, and then you need to submit that for academic review, because the whole purpose in doing this type of research is to raise awareness and to gain acceptance for the work that's been done, right? So we're not going to take any shortcuts on it. I know we're talking about it in kind of a flippant manner here. There are a lot of maps out there. We'll pull them down, but the focus is we got to present a coherent case that there's evidence in the Newport Tower being illustrated on the North American landscape prior to the colonial era, right? And if we do that well enough, then hopefully that will unlock the paradigm that we all seem to be in, the conventional wisdom where the only acceptance of, there is no acceptance of any pre-Columbian contact except for the Vikings, right? We feel that the Newport Tower is part of the puzzle, part of the evidence that demonstrates that folks knew about North America. They had traveled over here. They had even built a navigational marker survey point there in Narragansett Bay, and that was the Newport Tower.
Okay,
and Mark.
Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Forgive me. In addition to that, if people don't want to believe that, just say they don't want to believe what they can see with their eyes. Pat has done an amazing job in showing that the Newport Tower is basically a rectangular sundial or a vertical sundial. He has been able to show so many alignments, illuminations, all based on trigonometry, calculus, algebra. I know it's hard to fathom because we have this mindset in the 21st century, well, we're really superior, and that the people that came before us really weren't that superior. But in essence, they really were the ones that were superior in being able to come up with all these equations and ways of putting things together so that alignments on certain stones and openings inside the tower become almost like a miraculous miracle to us today. But thanks to Pat. Pat's research into the tower and that aspect alone could prove that the Newport Tower is definitely not a colonial artifact.
Yeah, and Steve, just to take what you just said and connect it to America's Stonehenge from the first hour. America's Stonehenge is more like horizontal, and the Newport Tower is obviously vertical, but both places emphasize like a lot of the same alignments and the astronomical understanding. It's actually very interesting how both sites are used as calendars.
Right, but I think Pat can tell you that I think the Newport Tower is definitely more complicated.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
So solar alignments were certainly a way of marking time. You find them in a lot of different cultures, extending well back in time. The importance of marking the seasons, knowing the time of the year, and that was something that had a lot of importance in terms of agriculture, right? You had to know when to sow the seed into the ground. You had to know your growing season. So alignments are really reflective of time junctures, right? Your solstices mark the endpoints of the cycle where the Earth first tilts one way, and then over the course of half the year, it reverses and it tilts to its maximum declination the other way, right? And then the equinoxes mark equal parts day and night. So, solar alignments had a purpose. They had a function, right? So, and the Newport Tower is no different. There's alignments in the tower there. Probably the first work, most certainly the first work on the alignments at the Newport Tower were done by Professor William Penhallow and a group of folks up there in Rhode Island, where they were observing the tower, right? William Penhallow, he was a professor of astronomy there, and so he understood the dynamics between the celestial heavens and the movement of the moon and the sun like that. So he was looking at the tower, and he started to pick up on the fact that the niches and the windows, there seemed to be a pattern to them, a very deliberate design pattern. And so he and others, they researched it. They published some papers. One of their big finds was the lunar major and lunar minor alignments from the east window to the west window. There's a paper out there on the internet that folks can download. He published a few articles there. It's all good work. Now, another gentleman who was helping William Penhallow, who got involved with it, was Jim Egan, right? Jim Egan expanded the initial work of Professor Penhallow, and he's done a fantastic job up there at the Newport Tower in documenting other alignments and in keeping the story of the Newport Tower alive. Fantastic gentleman. If you ever go up to Newport, I would put it on everyone's bucket list to pay a visit to Jim Egan and listen to his theories on the tower. Very engaging gentleman, very nice person. And anytime a researcher goes up there to research the tower, Jim always lends a helping hand. He's done it many, many times for myself and the other folks that we've done it. So anyways, so one of the interesting things that Jim Egan found, we only have a few minutes left here. and it's significant, right? So Jim, and of course this is through observation, right? Jim discovered that on the winter solstice, that shortly after sunrise, the sun will create what's called I call it a light box through the south window. It's an illumination, right? Passes through the west window, and then a short time later, it runs across this egg-shaped feature that's sitting in the arch between pillars number 7 and number 8. And Jim saw significance with that for a few reasons. You can't miss the egg when you look at the tower. Okay, I know a lot of folks assert, hey, it's just another stone, it's just sitting there, right? But I mean, it's pretty remarkable visually. You go out there and you take a look at it, you're like, bam. And so Jim found the alignment. Scott Wolter, a few years later, postulated that the egg happened to be positioned on the tower at a position that's in alignment with the Kensington Rune Stone out of Minnesota. It's quite an interesting concept there. And it
sounds like that the long distance alignment actually works.
So actually that's how I ended up focusing on the Newport Tower. Initially, I was just looking at Kensington Rune Stone, Spirit Pond Rune Stone for the geographic coordinates, and I'd be out there reading on the internet. And Scott Wolter had already published his book at the time that said, hey, there's this alignment going out there, and folks were just, they were number one, they didn't believe that there was an alignment, right? And some of the comments were pretty harsh, right? And they're like, So there's a lot of folks on the internet commenting on Jim Egan's egg illumination, right, on the winter solstice, and then a lot of folks were criticizing Scott Wolter for saying there's alignment. And I thought, well, that's pretty easy to verify whether Wolter's correct or not. I mean, it's a structure. We can go up there. We can measure the circumference of it. We can scale out, it's the degrees, and then we can determine whether that egg-shaped stone, the arch between pillars 7 and 8, if it's physically sitting at a position that does form an alignment going out to the Midwest and the Kensington Rune Stone. So over time, me and some other folks went up there and we did the measurements, and as it turns out, the egg, the leading edge, the southern part of the egg, is within like 0.3 of a degree of syncing up to the Kensington Rune Stone's location. Now that's just an associative type finding.
Okay. Hey, with that captivating fact, I think we're going to have to stop there. Barbara, do you want to wrap things up? I just want to thank Pat and Steve for giving us this fascinating discussion. And Barbara, you can step in and wrap things up, and we'll see everyone back here tomorrow night with Mary Joyce. And Barbara, you have a show Thursday?
I don't have one on Thursday, but I have one where I'm a guest. But I do want to thank these guys for, helping to expand our understanding of the tower, because it is something that we certainly have talked a lot about. I want to thank everybody for being with us, for joining us tonight, and remind you that we're usually here every Monday and Tuesday, and of course when we come up to the holiday, it may not be quite as frequent. We're going to take a little time off, But thank you, everybody, for listening. We greatly appreciate your time, your energy. Wishing everybody a good night, good evening, and we'll talk to you all soon.